where do they do that?
Well, they're at the new office now. Right. Wasn't bad at all.
Oh, yes.
The agendas are right out front.
Oh, they're outside?
Oh, okay.
Wasn't bad at all.
Nice.
Thank you.
Luckily, the way there was coming and going, there was a train going through that Mason Street.
Yeah.
So.
So Joe, just so you're aware, I don't, you're gonna have to run the meeting in January, because I won't be here now. I haven't looked at my schedule yet for that day in New Zealand, so I don't know exactly what I'm doing that day.
Okay.
But, it's basically an 18-hour difference, so it'll be like noonish for me, so that's a manageable time to function,
Okay.
provided I'm somewhere
Where you can.
where I can communicate.
Okay.
You know, so we'll have to see how, I'll look pretty soon, but
Let's look at the agenda.
just to see what I think I'm doing. And then if not, I just won't be here if I can't. There are, it's a matter of just communication. I mean,
Okay, all
lots of
right.
time I'm in places where there's just no internet, there's nothing.
Yeah.
So like I said, I just been a bit caught up with other things to start learning about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I will.
Excellent. Okay. Sounds good.
But I would say if we
I'm just a little
evaluate
concerned. I have to
applications,
leave work
we have
early
executive
because
session.
I work down by Villanova. So I have to get home, I have to take care of the animals all night, because Kevin's not home. And then I gotta change so you don't smell cows. Then I gotta drive up to Coca-Cola Park. So I'm gonna probably be a little bit late, but I'm gonna leave work early.
I think I inherited a cat, an outside cat, and I think she's pregnant, and she really likes me. She wants to climb on me. They said when a cat picks you, there's a reason. And I've also been outside with her. And she's such a cool cat.
They're all waiting for you.
Yeah. That's so
She has
funny.
white, but she must be pregnant because she's kind of, yeah, she's kind of big. And she comes every night, she comes a couple times a day to be fed. She wants to rent the house.
Not
And we
You
have
know,
to
it's
have
funny you
house.
say that. So
It
a
doesn't go
cat
good.
found us
I mean, he had to
15
really
years
do a lot
ago.
of work on it to get it out.
Just passed away like last week. And in January, it's been 11 months, 12 months. January, a cat found us. He's all black.
Yep.
Kevin called him Pink. I call him Gomez from the Adams family.
Yeah.
So his name's Pink Gomez.
Good, but still.
And
There's a lot
he
of
kind of
details
took
that go
Charlie's
on.
place. He mouses, he gets all
Yeah.
and he just took
They dissolve
and I don't know where he came from. I don't know if somebody dropped him off. I don't know if he got lost.
Well, they said when they choose you, it's
Looks like a gingerbread.
He loves cats. I'm surprised.
I've had 11.
Sorry, I had like a hashtag print something on today.
Well,
You just,
I
this is fine.
saw.
He's like, really? You're so true. I was like, I feel bad for you. I was like, thanks. I was like, okay.
I was came out,
Really was
broke and stretched.
hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's so damn cute, you can get it.
Yeah, anybody else would be like, and he's such a good guy, you're like,
I know what I saw.
Carol?
I saw
Hey,
it.
how are you?
Very good, thank you.
And they have places that says cat crossing.
Yeah.
And then news realized.
That's awesome. No.
Open space.
Open space.
It's a good little pun there.
How are you?
That's Chad.
Good. Hello.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
Very good, how are you?
Oh, do you have packets for everybody?
Nope, you just put your own and let's ask. Sorry. Right.
I just thought you made one for him and not for me, that's all. I was just gonna whine, that's all. I'm very good at that, it's my strong suit.
And you have to tell us that?
Yeah.
What happened to my notes that I had here?
Yeah, I got away with that, because that's off the record.
We're not on yet, right?
Yeah, but that was just on the top.
Now you are.
Folks, can't say that.
Kathy, what was your mother's first name?
Is this it?
We struggled with that the other day.
Helen.
Helen. Yeah, Leanne and I were, we can't come up with that, and we couldn't understand why. Because back when before that snowstorm crushed the farm stand down there, Leanne and the boys would go on bicycles there all the time. So I was like, I couldn't, it was driving me nuts, you know?
So there was a hunter up at the, there was a hunter, right? And I said to him, what are you doing, right? And he goes, oh, I'm hunting. I said, are you? I said, who gave you permission? He goes, Helen. I said, Helen? He goes, yeah. I'm like, that was my mom. She
Was that just
passed
recently?
24 years ago.
Was that this week?
A couple, like 2 months ago. He looked at me, I'm like, yeah, kid.
That gets passed down too, yeah.
I'm like, yeah,
Recognition of board.
That gets passed down too.
What, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I'll tell you this. Leanne had cut, we were on a trip because she cut a whole bunch of hot peppers for us, because my brother's brother-in-law, and she burned her fingers. She, you know, so she said to your mother, she thought, well, I'll ask Mrs. Fisher, you know, she deals with vegetables. She says, what should I do?
Good day to be at that,
What do to
huh?
calm my hands down? She told her what happened. I said, I don't know. I never did anything so stupid. Which was what you'd expect.
Touche.
Okay, Laura Ray's here, okay.
I am, but I don't wanna turn my head sideways.
Sure,
because
sure.
we'll,
Okay, so, let's call the meeting to order. I'll start with roll call. Bruce Romanowski, I'm here. Jennifer Halton, Vice Chairman.
Here.
Laura Ray,
Here.
Secretary. Alan Johnson.
Here.
Cheyenne Reeman.
Here.
Kathy McGovern.
Here.
Chad Heidecker.
Here.
Janine is not here. Russell Sutton.
Here.
Clark Winfield.
Winfield Clark.
Winfield Clark.
In the last meeting, Drew.
I know, we just talked about that. I apologize. I'm just seeing if you were paying attention.
Oh, I certainly was.
And Harry Vitchin.
Here.
Okay, good. Let's rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have no executive session. Harry, do you have any report in particular? No. Okay. So let's move right into the agenda, as we actually do have a busy evening. So Open Space Subcommittee property updates. We have one property to discuss tonight. I want to make something clear, in particular, if there's anyone in the public who was at a council meeting when this property was discussed. One, we never reveal properties by landowner name or whatever. So this property is 2024 number 7. And at that council meeting, there were some assertions that EAC open space wasn't moving on things appropriately. That's really not true. In reality, we receive a formal application from the landowner with other materials, including a sketch map and or typically an aerial photo showing the property with acreage, and the standard application form requires the property owner to characterize the site in many respects, and we never received that. So this was unusual. So we didn't act on anything immediately because it was not the normal procedure. However, given that council wanted EAC's open space to score the property, I did receive from the township, Carol shared with me a contact for the law firm that represents the property owner, but not the property owner. I reached out to them, and one of their office assistants got back and said, you can walk the site and score it. It's fair to do that. No one will meet you there. Just do so at your convenience. So the Open Space Committee convened rapidly. I mean, 2 days after I had permission, and we went out on Sunday and scored the property. With respect to that, the score sheet and attributes are as follows. The development potential, there apparently are development plans for it, so that's scored a 5 out of 5. Linkage potential, there's no open space directly adjacent that would facilitate continuation of habitat or wildlife movement or anything of that sort, so that scored a 0 out of 2. it is not an active farm, so 0 out of 3. The site does have ag soils of statewide significance, so it scored a 1 out of 1. Hydrological features, it scored 3 out of 3. One of the soils on the site is along the stream channel in the riparian corridor. That soil is classified as a hydric soil, which indicates the importance of hydrology there. It is a tributary to Black River, and now that everyone has read the Open Space Action Plan in preparation for this meeting, you recall that the Black River corridor was highlighted as a particular piece of real estate that open space should always take into consideration. So it held that property. There were wetlands on the site associated with that. And so that site scored a 3 out of 3 for hydrologic features. Out of sensitive natural features, there were no steep slopes. There were no biota of significance, of statewide significance or sensitive, but there is floodplain potential there. And so we scored that a 1 out of 3 in terms of sensitive natural features. It's entirely underlain by carbonate rock, so carbonate geology, it scores a 3 out of 3. Scenic value scored 2 out of 2, and I already mentioned this, stormwater potential is 1 out of 1. Given that if there is a floodplain there, that will help mitigate runoff, and also because it's a carbonate landscape, the topography is very low gradient. Water will naturally pond there to provide stormwater retention. So again, we scored that a 1 out of 1. So it scored a 16 out of 23 possible points. The Open Space Committee recommended unanimously that we recommend to council that this property have an assessment, a property value assessment for purposes of a conservation easement. We think it's worth preserving. A couple of other bits of information on the background. It is 7.7 acres, and its zoning district is R40, which is rural residential development. So that's the summary of the property. Does anyone have anything to discuss regarding that evaluation?
Where is it?
I'm gonna.
Right across the street,
Where is it?
right across the street.
It's right across the street.
From here?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, yes. So before I make a motion that we vote on to recommend this to council, I want to just point out one other thing procedurally, that when we vote, we can vote audibly, which we have, but let's also raise our hands, either in favor, against, or if you abstain. And the simple reason is Carol needs to record the vote numerically. She doesn't identify who voted how on any motions, but let's make it easier for her to raise her hand as well, so she doesn't have to try to read lips and determine who voted which way, okay? So with that, I move that we recommend to council that they have this property value assessed for conservation easement, environmental conservation easement. All in favor?
Oh, I second your
Aye.
motion.
I'm sorry, second. All against? Anyone against? That was unanimous, wasn't it, Carol? Yes.
I had a question then, Drew. We shouldn't be voting, correct, as associate member? Okay,
yes.
so we'll just.
Only the voting
It's
members.
exciting
yes.
to vote because everyone, it's normally unanimous, but I
No,
just wanted
good
to make
point.
sure, so yeah, we'll just sit
Only
there.
the voting members. Okay, so that covers that, and that'll move forward. That brings us to new business. Tonight we have a visitor, Matt Babbitt. He's a conservation acquisition specialist with the Heritage Conservancy. Welcome to our meeting, Matt. We're glad you're here, and we'll leave you to explain to us the Heritage Conservancy, what you do, and whatever you had in mind.
Where do you want?
Normally take the speaker there.
There's a lot of like animations, so you might have to click through a whole bunch.
Can I speak back to your side?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay, sweet, thanks. Yep, so my name is Matt from Heritage Conservancy. We are a statewide nonprofit organization based in Doylestown. And I'm here to kind of present a little bit about what our work is, what we look for in protecting property, and some services that we can offer to the township to aid in your efforts. It might work to press the slideshow button at the very bottom.
Go,
No,
no, go to the, right
Next.
before the negative for your volume.
Right there.
yeah, that one. There you go. Sweet. So this is just a quick map of kind of all of our holdings. We are based in Bucks, but we work primarily in Montgomery, Northampton County, and Bucks, and do have some older holdings out in side counties, mainly from relationships with old board members and things like that. But our main focus is in the Montgomery, Bucks, and Northampton County. As you can see, we've protected over 17,000 acres across that landscape, and that's including properties that we own outright, properties we hold easements on, and then also facade easements, which there aren't a lot of, and there aren't a lot of organizations who dabble in that work, but trying to protect the historic resources here. Okay, next. Oh. All right. This is just an overview. You guys probably might be familiar with this, but just a quick overview of all of the different protected properties in the township and kind of in the region. This is from the We Can Serve PA database, which they're kind of the statewide bellwether for the nonprofit land trusts in the state. They maintain this GIS database. They also maintain the statewide model conservation easement. They just changed all of their color coding, so it's kind of really hard to see. But this gives a broad overview of county parks. It's really hard to see the difference between the land trust and the government conservation easements, and then quite a few of the county farm easements as well. The next slide shows just the properties that Heritage is involved with. Either there are some that we are the easement holder, or some that we act as a land trust beneficiary, which is kind of a tertiary role to provide backup and defense against things that might get missed, or if one of the easement holders fails at their duties or needs to absolve themselves. 10 acres total, with just over 260 acres protected throughout the township, and one of them bleeds into Bucks. That's always a fun project to have. Next slide. So conservation values, kind of want to talk about the why, the how, and the what of land conservation. Some of this information might be something you guys already know, and feel free to wave me on if it's something that everyone knows, but just wanted to kind of give our perspective of it all. There's a couple here you can press through. We're looking at, keep going, good, sweet. So we're looking at the woodlands, steep slopes, streams and wetlands, farmland soils, and of course everybody's favorite creatures. A lot of this mapping is from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. They maintain a database throughout the whole Lehigh and Northampton County that has great GIS layers of all these natural resources. It's a little hard to get. You can't like upload a single property into, but if you know where the property is, you can at least zoom in and see. And that's part of their big regional comp plan. And then, farmland soils, we tend to rely on USDA soil mapping, and then the species of concern tend to show up on PINDI reports, Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory, which is a giant database by a few state agencies, Fish and Boat, DCNR, and Game Commission, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife, that help us identify projects that might impact species of concern. It also prescribes recommended conservation measures largely around wetland areas and sometimes, you know, really species-specific stuff. It rarely identifies the actual name of the species just to protect it against you know, poaching and other nefarious actors, but it's a great resource to have. Next slide. Conservation values, what we're also looking at, go ahead, is the same Lehigh Valley database. This is looking at the what's known as core habitat and supporting landscapes of the Natural Heritage Inventory. This is a big database and a giant plan that's like, I don't know, 500 pages long that I get to sort through quite a bit. That the county has gone through and already identified landscapes that are worthy of protection based on kind of a conglomerate of all of those resources we looked at beforehand. Next slide. And then, you know, that kind of covers what we're looking for, and then why go after, or why would somebody else want to protect it all. You know, there's scenic views, history and culture, recreation and drinking water, and public value or property value as well. I know the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission did a big return on the environment study, but it's pretty outdated. It's about 2014. But Montgomery County just did one back in 2022, and I think they found that open space adds about 14,000 in value to properties within a half mile. So there's a lot of great data out there about public benefits for protecting open space that go far beyond just the recreation side, or, you know, the public access side. Next slide. There's also some financial considerations for landowners who might be interested in doing this. There's kind of, you know, a couple of different options to look at for how they would get paid, or how they would go about the easement transaction, whether they're looking at a complete charitable donation, where they are in a position to have it be a tax benefit. Might also be through a bargain sale, where only a portion of the value is offered in cash, and the rest can be donated, or sometimes they want you know, every penny of that appraised value, which I completely understand and takes some funding efforts. Some other considerations they have to think about. You know, these transactions are susceptible to capital gains tax. There's the really fun mortgage subordination, which requires us working with their bank to put the interest of the easement ahead of the mortgage loan, so that if there is a foreclosure, that the easement doesn't get absolved through that foreclosure and can stay protected. And then there's always the tricky estate and inheritance tax if those properties are subject to that. Next. And then a little bit of difference of the different kind of easements we see around here, the conservation easement versus the county ag easement. We work in both, but only kind of hold the conservation easements. Sometimes we play a tertiary role to the agricultural easements. The conservation easement, at least modern day ones, prescribe 3 different levels of protection to the property, with a lot of different uses in each of those protection areas, and prescribes a minimal protection area over the residential area, whereas the ag easement is kind of just a blanket cover of the whole property, and then like a building envelope or an accepted area that is not subject to the terms of the easement and gets left out.
Can you explain that a little bit? The conservation, 3 levels of protection, what does that mean?
Yeah, I'll get into that next. So yeah, so the ag, you know, it also only protects it as ag uses. It has to stay in ag uses, and the county and state ag uses still tend to allow for oil and gas development, whereas conservation easements are strictly not allowing those, and are really focused on the protection of the natural resources, as opposed to the ag, which one is kind of focused on it remaining ag, active ag lands. If you want to go to the next slide. So these 3 levels of protection, go ahead. The mineral protection area is this yellow area, which is typically the, what is the current residential area. Old easements might have accepted that out and just made it not subject to the easement, but that also means that it doesn't count as acreage that gets calculated into the final purchase price for the landowner. It's built, the language around those protections are kind of built to allow the place to be livable and really kind of not restrict much more than what zoning would allow. There are some height and utility limitations, and typically there's a negotiation around the number of improvements for the future, and dwelling units as well. We try to factor in and work with landowners if they want to plan for a in-law suite or something like that. But that kind of sets us a number up front. The standard protection area, this orange, is typically used for open fields or agricultural areas, whether they are currently under active ag production or an area that, thinking in perpetuity, the landowner wants to allow ag to happen. That's both for sustainable ag and forestry. There's some allowable improvements, but no residential buildings. It allows for like barns and run-in sheds and fences, things that are appropriate for ag and forestry, but it comes with height limitations and impervious coverage limitations, and then there are special protections for wet areas, 100 feet from a stream or wetland, and then steep slopes as well have special protections. And then the highest protection, the green here, is really saved for those ecologically sensitive habitats, and that is the most restrictive language in the easement. Really only allows for minimal, improvements. No real buildings, and there's limitations on the resource disturbance and management. So there's a built-in calculation for allowing landowners to take about like a cord of firewood, but it's pretty strict against clear cutting or forestry activities and things like that, and really prescribes to protecting those natural resources. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I said a question and you answered it then in the end, but unless I'm losing my color sense, it's the bottom one, they're both yellow, the top and the bottom highlight.
There's this little strip of yellow, and then there's orange kind of in the middle, and then the top and the bottom are the green.
Okay.
It's kind of showing up weird on the slide here too.
Yeah,
So
I thought that highest protection area would be highlighted in green, but then maybe that'd be hard to read if it was, in that color that matches up with
it's
it.
supposed to be. Yeah. So that thin strip is the minimal, the residential area.
Okay.
The big chunk and the little sliver up top are the highest, and then that one in the middle is the standard. And this map looks different for every property. Some properties don't have a standard because they're just all forested and it isn't suitable for ag. It really is kind of a property specific thing, but this is kind of the starting point in our model easement and in the statewide model easement as well.
What are the asterisks for?
Great question. Those are items that are subject to official review by the holder, which is like a capital R defined term in an official process where some things are spelled out, permitted, but subject to review, or other things are banned but could be proposed by a landowner. Like as an example for fences, they're allowed to be 5 feet. If they want to go over 5 feet, then that's subject to review, and things of that nature.
What about the renewable energy improvements?
Yeah, so the same thing is there are certain clauses in the model document that at least speak to the height and like when concerned that there's a height restriction, but in that whole standard area, but we realize that windmills might need to be higher than 35 feet, and so there's a review clause if the landowner wishes to, to do that. Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get to this. I saw the mention of a facade easement. Is that something you're going to cover further, or I just didn't understand what that meant?
Oh, yeah, sure. I did not. I don't have a slide highlighting here. So the facade easement is really kind of a completely different thing, a completely different idea, a completely different document. It doesn't focus on the land at all. It's focused on the building and the exterior of the building, and really in preserving that historic, the facade is a facade easement. There's no
another word for that.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean. It doesn't pertain to the land or the ecological impact or anything like that.
No. Sometimes they can be combined, but a property could have just a facade easement, but it only protects the historic buildings. It's not concerned with the interior, and there's there's like a fine precipice between it being protecting it, but then also being an affirmative protection requiring the upkeep and the maintenance and the repair, as opposed to just keeping it as is. The conservation easement. There are restrictions on buildings, but it's not really caring about what the outside looks like. It's really about the use and the activity and the size there. So
makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The idea of a conservation easement, and then the actual conservation easement, the document that gets spelled out and recorded and negotiated. Becomes the legal agreement. Either ourselves as a land trust can serve as the holder, the township or the county could serve as a holder, but there are strict IRS rules about what types of organizations or entities can serve in those roles. And there's 3 roles. The holder is kind of the top main defense charged with monitoring and enforcement. The co-holder can typically share some of those responsibilities, but when those starred items that come to review really land with the holder with input, sometimes, but the ultimate decision maker is the holder, and then that beneficiary. A lot of times you see either the state or the county come in as that beneficiary, as the funder, and they come in with their own set of extra rules as well, or requirements based on their funding. It does get recorded as part of the legal title, so when you sell the property or when the property is sold in 3024, that document is still there and viable. It's protected in perpetuity, so that it takes a court to absolve a conservation easement unless you don't do your due diligence with the bank, and that there's restrictions around the uses and improvements or buildings and structures there. Go ahead. How it gets done. It's a lengthy process, especially if there gets to be a third-party grant involved. It typically goes about 18 to 24 months. If there's a grant, that can really expand into 36 or further. With all these different phases, first you're kind of going and seeing the property, doing your property scores. We have our own rubric, much like you all. And then there's the process of taking it through funding, sources. We have some funding of our own, but don't really act as a main source of funding. We typically have that limited to be able to kind of be a pot sweetener, and rely on municipalities or county or state or federal grants to be those funders when it comes. This is where we're getting the appraisal, writing grant applications, seeking board approvals from townships, and getting kind of the project together. And then once all that funding is secured, making the official offer to the landowner, which comes through a legal agreement of sale that has a copy of the conservation easement. And then the really fun phase, the due diligence, where we get to do the survey and the title work and going through potentially phase one environmental site assessments if you've got a property with like a big farm dump or that you know is next to a landfill or might be home to really special creatures that require some ground truthing. And then this is where we come in and do the baseline documentation and deal with the bank. And then you can finally get to settlement after all of that. And then there's the monitoring in perpetuity question. Yeah.
I have a question. Does a township have the right to remove a conservation easement, or does it have to go further down the line?
To what do you mean to remove?
If there's a conservation easement on a piece of property, can the township remove that on their own through council?
That is a really tricky question. Most easements take court to absolve, but that is also why we see a lot more townships who hold easements bring in a third party like Heritage or another nonprofit or the county or the state to guard against future boards who may try to absolve. There's a lot of that. There's a really good case study going on in real time out in Montgomery County in Upper Pottsgrove Township, where a property was bought using open space funds through the township. There was no third party to the grant, and the current Board of Supervisors are trying to build a township facility on the land, but it was used, was bought with open space funds, kind of for the intent of not being able to do that. So it's really tricky on the whole. I would say no, at least that's not the intent, but it's not as ironclad as yes and no.
We have a similar situation occurring right now in this township. It's in Northampton County Court as we speak.
Okay.
So it's a major problem.
Yeah, gotcha.
And that's why I was asking that question.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend reaching out to We Can Serve PA. They have a great EAC collective, EAC. They host an EAC conference every year, but they also have dedicated resources. They have a whole plethora of guidance documents. They just did a workshop on this very question for EACs and townships back in October, I think. I can try to find that. There might still be a link to it and a recording, but they are probably the best resource for answering those kinds of questions and getting to the meat of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think somewhere along the line, our township got away from putting third parties on easements. I don't know why. Would it be possible if we wanted to put a third party on an easement that already exists, or is that?
It would likely take an amendment, which means a drafting and negotiating of another document and getting all of the current parties to agree and sign to that. It's certainly a possibility.
Just wondered if you ever experienced something like that.
I personally have not gone through that, but I'm new here. I'm about 2.5 years in with Heritage, but I am sure that we have been drawn into that in our lengthy history. But it's not as easy as just picking up a hitchhiker or something like that. It's a whole legal process and requires a whole nother re-recording. But later on, when we do offer monitoring services for townships. So if it isn't possible to get us, to get a third party legally on the easement agreement, we can at least provide monitoring services, and things like that. But it's yeah. Yeah. Great. Next slide. Third-party grants. I left one off of here because the county has both an ag preservation program and their open space program, but their open space program is currently going through kind of a whole new revamping and rewriting, and so it's not completely finished. And I didn't want to present inaccurate or incomplete information. But these are, mainly sources that we look for funding for projects, but these are sources we also, go after on the behalf of townships. The county ag program is pretty unique and completely different than these other two. It has a lot of strict requirements. If they're going to use state funding, it has to be 50 acres. If it's just county funding, it has to be 25 acres. There is an exception to that it can be at least 10 acres if it's adjacent to already protected property. There are really strict requirements around the actual makeup and geology of the property that kind of like the property can't change its characteristics to meet those, but they require half of the property be these class 1 through 4 soils, and that half of the property is under active ag production, whether that's pasture or farm animals or something else. There is a capped per acre price. I had trouble finding, and I didn't want to misrepresent here, but even if a property values above it, the county program is capped at only offering X number of dollars. And then they rank annually, and typically we find that the top 3, maybe 1, get awarded, and then those properties just get re-rolled into next year's application and kind of reshuffled. So it can kind of, it can be somewhat frustrating and somewhat of a long process to have a property finally make it up to the top award for that year. But it does, you can just stay in the program. You don't have to keep reapplying, which is somewhat nice, but also tough. The state program, the C2P2 grant, is both for conservation easements and fee simple acquisitions if the township wanted to buy property and own it itself. It's a long process. You apply in April. They don't tell you till October, November, and you can't start spending the money till next January. And then you have to wait till next April to apply. It's a statewide competition, so it's pretty fierce, and the funding is not expansive, so there are regularly a lot more applications than awards, but it is a 50% match on a reimbursement basis. So the person who, the entity who gets the grant award has to front everything, and then after everything closes and your grant report is in, they reimburse you their half. They do allow for some money up front with certain goals met to help kind of ease the process and speed things along, but you won't get all of your money back until everything's done. And that funds both the acquisition cost, the money paid to the landowner, and the project cost, the survey, the title work, all that kind of stuff. And they don't have a public access, like a strict public access requirement. It does count as, I think, 15 or 20 points in their grading rubric. And it is highly encouraged, but they will work with you if it's a special property, or if, you know, if sometimes landowners just aren't willing to, but they kind of also accept a scale of public access all the way up to, you know, a public trail, down to, you know, the township or a nonprofit being able to lead small groups on nature walks, you know, a few times out of the year. And they also recognize when a property's habitat is so special or unique or sensitive that public access would degrade those resources. And then the other grant that just in 2023 became eligible to municipalities is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Highlands Conservation Grant. That is a regional program that stretches between almost Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, up through the Catskills and Jersey and into almost Hartford, Connecticut, I believe, with all of those municipalities being eligible to apply. It's a federal program that gets funneled through the state to the municipality. It also covers 50% of both acquisition and the project costs, and kind of the same idea of public access of it counts towards their rubric, it's encouraged, but it's not outright required, and they work with you and the landowner to adjust to what the property is specific for. So in 2023 they opened up to municipal eligibility, and then in 2024 they like tripled the region that is eligible. If you want to go to the next page. So Lower Saucon is in here red. The interior black outline was the existing eligibility region, and then all of these municipalities out to the teal outline is the new eligibility for this year. So there's quite a bit of competition. This program, you have to have your application into the state by Thanksgiving, and then they turn everything into the feds at the end of the year, but it's actually a pretty quick turnaround. They're anticipating about a February award notice, and then you can start moving on the project, and you have 3 years to complete it. But as you see, there's a lot of competition out there, and it has 3 categories. The state kind of gets its own fund for some special projects, and then there's a separate pot of money for all of these municipalities to compete against, and then there's a third they just created for pockets of under-resourced or underserved areas that they've identified, that kind of gets its own category. And we got a grant through this in 2023 for a property out in Lower Frederick Township in Montgomery County, and then we submitted 3 applications this year to this program, and have our fingers crossed. Yes, sir.
Like for instance, a township owns a lot of property outright.
Mm-hmm.
Can they go for a grant or something and put that property into some kind of a conservation situation?
Sure, that is possible. I mean, it is possible for a township to own a property and not have further, easement protections on it. But the township, if it owns the property, could not hold the easement. Some other third party, the county or a nonprofit, would have to be the holder of that easement. We run into the same thing for properties that we own. If we choose to protect them through a conservation easement, we can't be a party to the easement.
So they could actually get some money for doing that, like if they got it from the state?
Potentially. I have not gone through a situation like that myself, so I can't speak to too much of how, of what's viable, but I don't see why a property that isn't protected through an easement wouldn't be eligible for a grant that, for that purpose.
Do you have any examples of recent award winner or grant approvals, like
Yeah, I mean,
number
and-
one from the county and or
like to show you, or?
I guess, I don't know. Yeah, so
To give us
understand
an
the,
idea.
like, what is the size, how much acreage we're looking at, and typical, and where are they located, and, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, they're looking at a lot of the same resources that you guys are looking at in your rubric, listening to your considerations tonight. For this program in particular, in 2023, we were awarded a project in Lower Frederick Township. That property is about 65 acres along the Perkiomen Creek. That landowner has graciously agreed to allow the township to build a small trail connector because there's a township park across the street. This program looks at that same project, I will say, got rejected by the state program though, which was a tough thing to get back. But the state program is really, really competitive and is really skewed. We've seen much more towards the fee simple buying the property than the easement. This year alone, we went out for a big property through the state program for a conservation easement that was about 80 acres and has full public access, and it got denied. So it's really kind of persnickety each year. The federal program here, it's hard to prescribe a set acreage. What they're really looking for, what we've learned is that they want the federal contribution to the project to be at least 100 grand, meaning the total project would be 200 grand at least. You could have a smaller property that appraises really high and gets you to that number, or you might need a big property that, I've seen a 50-acre property go for 2,000 an acre, adjacent to a 20-acre property that goes for 22,000 an acre. So it's really, really property specific and resource specific as far as getting to that threshold. But I'll say that the state program that kind of administers this federal connection is really excited about this being open to municipalities and protecting properties. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want to get an idea of what their scoring metric would be, I guess.
Yeah, if you want to dig around their whole rubric and their whole request for, I don't think it's an RFP, or a request for funding appraisal or proposal, but they spell out their whole entire rubric and their grading system and their criteria. This program looked at, they have their own mapping that looks at forest resources, agricultural resources, water resources, development potential, a special category for being in underserved areas. They're looking at cultural and historical resources. It's a lot of similarities in the resource categories between all of these programs, but then the actual grant questions get a lot more specific between the programs. Yeah.
So along those lines, does Heritage Conservancy, you have your own criteria, much like we did a checklist?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you my card before you leave. If you could email me a copy of that, that'd be great.
Okay.
And I could share ours with you for your information. But
sure.
That would be helpful for us to see what, and if you have, anything just readily available on your computer of some of the other agencies and what their criteria might be, that would be great. But I'm not asking you to do any research on that, but just what you might already have at your fingertips.
Sure. They're all like publicly, available.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine I can just Google the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Islands
Yeah.
Preservation Act, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Oh, and, never mind, go ahead. So what we also offer aside from going out for protecting properties our own is services for townships. We work with several townships here in Northampton County, Williams Township, Moore Township, Upper Mount Bethel Township, and we have worked with Lower Saucon in the past. We work with Richland Township and a few others in Bucks of providing professional services through annual contracts, or sometimes they're set up on recurring basis for kind of two different fields, one being the open space consulting and the other being easement monitoring. For the open space consulting, we work with the EAC or the Open Space Board to kind of identify and filter and review properties to go through the appraisal process and help move it to the Board of Supervisors, and then with the Board of Supervisors and the manager, go through all of the due diligence and agreement drafting and drafting the conservation easement and kind of coordinating all of the due diligence, the survey and the title work ordering and working to get those things accurate, and kind of the whole process, scheduling settlement and providing monitoring for those properties that we serve as a party to the easement along with that township, and if they want to go after county or state or federal grants, we do the grant writing for them and submit on their behalf, and work with them to get the project through. And we also offer monitoring for easements that the township might hold on their own, but we find a lot of townships, especially the smaller ones, just don't have the staff to go out and do the actual annual monitoring and the reporting, and so we provide that as a service. And I can leave you with just kind of some example language of some of our contracts and scope of work, and a general idea of the fees and things like that. If and speaking to your township manager, it seemed like there might be some interest in establishing a more formal relationship. So, getting to that point. And then I think that's my last slide. So I'll take any other big questions. Yeah.
In regard to the public use, is there like a database somewhere of what those properties would be?
What do you mean?
Like the ones that have public access?
I don't know of a database specifically for that purpose. That I'm trying to think. That We Can Serve PA is a public GIS database that shows like all of the protected lands, and typically you can kind of click on the property boundary and it'll at least tell you who holds the easement. You might have to go through public records to find that public document, or you can contact that entity and ask about it. Not all easements include public access, and I don't know of any database for like private land easements as opposed to like a public park that might have an easement on it that is there.
I was just curious.
It's interesting. I was just in New York City this last weekend, and they have a database that is private owned public spaces that are like public atriums you can get in and out of the cold.
Oh yeah.
And that's exactly like, that would be awesome. You could pop up a map and
that's what I was asking. It's almost counterintuitive if you say it's public use. Like I had an issue. We have actually a property in the township that has a public use on it. The township is the actual easement owner, and the only reason I know is because I had buyers looking at it. So it was in the document, but otherwise, like it's like, oh, it's public use, but the public really wouldn't know, you know what I mean? That's why I was asking.
Gotcha.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure, no, we get that question a lot. I mean, a lot of times the public access that's written into easement is limited.
Yeah.
As opposed to just Joe Schmo coming onto the property or a trail, sometimes it's limited to kind of led groups, and so you'd have to go through that holder entity to kind of, schedule something.
Okay, yeah, this one, that's what, I just pulled it up as I was thinking about it, it doesn't say, like, because that was one of my questions, like, do you have to, like, schedule it, or is it truly just public use that you just go? And it doesn't specify that, but it does specify, like, what the use is, like, you can't use firearms, no campfires, but it's like hiking, bird watching, those kind of things.
Yeah, it really, those kind of rules would be really specific to each easement as opposed to general prescription across
Sure.
every property. Some of them are just open, and some of them are restricted with rules like that, and other entities, adding those.
Other questions for Matt?
This is very informative. Thank
Thank
you
you
very
for
much for
coming.
coming.
Yeah, sure thing.
Now
Do you
we
have any
have,
questions for us?
we have another reference.
Yeah, no, I mean, we certainly, I know we have a history of working together through easements that we are partners on, but we are certainly interested in renewing that work. I mean, there are certainly properties that we've identified that are ripe for preservation. We would love to work with you guys to try to protect. So, we can certainly continue the conversation here or with the, manager or whatever.
It's a three-way question. Is he allowed to tell us properties that in the township that would be, isn't that what you just said? That you would identify properties in the township? Is he allowed to share that information with us? Like, is that something we can? Is it something we can,
Can't force a property owner to.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's appropriate for public meeting setting, but it's certainly
No, no,
something
no.
that we can.
No, I didn't mean the public, in the public, but what, my point is,
We don't already know.
we are, there are some new members on the open space committee, so we are learning. At the same time, as a group, we are discussing, do we have an open forum for landowners? That's where the thought process was coming. So do you, kind of pinpoint into some of the landowners that you have identified? I'm just kind of processing, that's all, and kind of thinking about it. Because one of our thoughts was, there's a lot of new people in the township. So then there's people out there that probably have no idea what open space is. So that was the thought process. And we were discussing having an open forum in January, February.
Sure, yeah, we have hosted many forums like that for townships to walk through, some of the same information here. It gets a little more in depth into the process for the landowner and things like that. But I mean, we just did that in Moore Township, and they had a few come through. So I mean, that's definitely something that we could do. That keeps things general, so people aren't called out there. But certainly.
I think a lot of people are not aware.
So it'd be
An
nice.
interesting question too is that I've often wondered about when I travel down to say Quakertown, there seems to be a number of preserved farms with metal signage there, and I've often wondered, okay, what are the relative benefits to the landowners to preserve through, say, your Lower Saucon Township, to get a conservation easement through our township versus one of these county or federal programs? And I know that we have, Sandy Yerger works for you, right? And so Sandy, and she
many
would
years
share
ago.
this, has worked where we have had some properties that were sort of joint ventures. And I caught wind of, I don't know the details, but there was a mention that apparently someone from the Heritage Conservancy has spoken to someone here in the township about a property that might be a sensible joint venture. But I've never had any follow-up, and perhaps I'll try to push some buttons and find out what the status of that inquiry was.
Sure, I mean, there hasn't been a response.
Yeah, because it's like anything, you see what you see and follow up. So I could easily imagine someone in our township seeing the same preserved farmland plaques and reaching out and exploring that possibility, and maybe not even be aware that we have a township plan. So,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah, I mean-
we intend to try to reach out to people, again, as Kathy pointed out,
Yeah.
in the new year.
Yeah, when we see townships that kind of work on their own and fund properties on their own and bring us in as a third party to the easement to be a backup and to provide some of the, you know, services and getting it through. We see some that, you know, don't have as robust funds and have to go after third-party grants, whether that's the county, but then
I saw several light bulbs flash on above several of our heads when you mentioned the benefits of having a third party involved, especially for large tracts and particularly sensitive tracts. So that in and of itself, that's been a very helpful thing. But I think we all learned quite a bit, and we greatly appreciate your sharing your knowledge and time with us.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
We'll probably be inviting you back in February to talk landowners.
Yeah.
Sure. Great.
Do you have a card for us?
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
Just sample language about, you know, contracts that we've done with others and then our rates for next year.
I'll make copies, Kathy.
Okay.
Yep, here's a business card for me.
Okay.
You can email me.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you see me twisting myself into a pretzel?
Yeah, I didn't. My neck already hurts, so I
I
don't
was like,
wanna-
just leave me hanging.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Cheyenne. Yeah, familiar face, I think. But it was nice to meet you. Thank you for all the information. I could stop and chicken cutlets, and I feel like I smell like chicken and oil. So I apologize if I smell like, I wash my hands how many times?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Why do I smell like dinner?
It's probably your hair.
Probably like oil all over myself, so I apologize.
I don't smell anything.
Oh my God.
I smell like gasoline, because I filled.
I think I'd rather smell
I was
that.
on empty. I forgot I had gotten gas.
Oh, no.
I was on E when I left.
Yeah.
I almost had like 10 gallons.
Yeah.
It's hard to
And
get.
get going.
You might.
Drew, I have a
Well, not too
copy of
long.
one of the easements. I mean, it's public, but anybody can pull it up. So I just send it to you.
Stipulations.
It's one specific in the township.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Great. Thank you. Okay, well, that was, I think, very
That was really
helpful for
informative.
all of us.
That was probably one of the best presentations I've
Do you have a
seen.
copy of that presentation?
It has to be spelled out.
I don't
No,
think
we
we have
don't.
one right now.
So we can email and ask him for it.
We could probably request, you didn't keep a copy. Oh, okay, very good. Okay, good. Yeah, that would give us something to pursue. I think one of the key elements, of course, is the fact that the third-party element can clearly be very helpful.
Would there be a downside to
Resources.
having a third party?
I'm sorry?
Would there be a downside to having the third party?
Someone would have to tell us what that is, but I don't see it on the surface myself.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, is there?
Is there a cost associated with a third party? Or,
I'm sure there is.
I mean, that's the only.
Legal fees.
If you call that a downside, you know, it's just.
Could be legal fees involved.
Yeah, but it would be what you want.
I'm
To
curious.
protect.
The thought process at the time was probably because the township owned it at that, you know what I mean? So they probably were like, why, at the time,
Right.
why bother, you know, incur that extra cost?
I'm just curious if there's any properties out in the township that fit into those grant categories at all, that would even.
Some of the Highlands ones would. Again, in simple terms, the forested hills around here are all, that's where the term the Highlands came from. And so they naturally would fit in that federal program, I guess, provided acreage limitations. But other than that, they're going to be within those boundaries.
I mean, what do we have left in the township that would fit into that?
Yeah,
There's only a
yeah.
few places you can think of.
There might be though.
There's probably
That's something
quite a
we'll have to
bit.
look at.
Yeah, their own privately.
Yeah.
and you don't think about it.
Right.
Right, well, I guess
But they
that's
have
part
to
of this
have-
conversation is, or we're not necessarily soliciting the community, but maybe
Well, no, but
we
you
can.
can inform them.
But we can educate
Just
and
educate.
perhaps host a session that would announce this.
That's what Kathy's
The
talking
difference
about
between
too.
a third
Right.
party.
Great
So I
idea.
think it's a good idea.
But we also discussed,
But then there's recourse. So for example, so the question was, what's the difference between a third party and not? Conceptually, I'll leave it at that. Conceptually, a township could perhaps step in to try to void an easement. And then it's just the township versus the landowner, or the public trust that might own that land. And oftentimes that's going to be an asymmetric, in terms of strength of the two parties, there's gonna be a strong asymmetry. So if you have a third party, you have another viable sort of ally
One has to agree.
in
Another
trying
leverage. More
to
leverage.
battle a conflict of
I'd really
that
be
sort.
curious to see what the cost would be, because if they're gonna oversee this, I would imagine there's gonna be like a continual cost, not just front end legal, you know what I mean? That might be,
Maintenance.
that might be a downside depending on what that would look like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, like in the township, we have the open space funds, and some of those dollars can be applied to that annual maintenance and monitoring. Mhm. Which
I
is
think it would
good,
be
we're
a good
lucky, where
idea.
other
Yeah,
Can't do it.
municipalities may not.
Right, can't afford it.
Correct.
But you're about to-
Drew, the question on this, that Chad was asking, we were gonna, weren't we gonna pinpoint owners of X number of acres? It had to be over X number of acres, and I don't remember what the number
Yeah, so
was.
let me just, let's keep this within the confines of our agenda. And so, the idea here was that Matt would give us his presentation, and then the next item is open space program. So I just formally wanted to say, okay, now we're under agenda item B, open space program, so we could have this discussion. And so, yeah, there are a couple of things I'd hope we could talk about tonight briefly. And it has already been a long meeting, but I'm just trying to be efficient, not trying to stifle conversation. But one of the things we have talked about was having a public information session and trying to encourage landowners to come to that. And so your question is one that we informally discussed, I think, which is, well, do we send a flyer to every resident in the township? That doesn't make any sense, right? So if we targeted space, I think there are probably at least two criteria that we could use as selectors. One would be some acreage, right? We could choose an acreage. The other thing that I think it's fair now to assume is we've all read the open space action plan. And in that action plan, which is our current guidelines, they identified quite a number of places that they felt had environmental significance, usually hydrological significance. And one of the things that jumps out is that all of the highlands, Swoveburg Hill, et cetera, were identified as places where springs and the headwaters of drainages are, steep slopes. So those are natural pieces of real estate that we could highlight. But to try to reach out to people, two possibilities exist there, as I said, as selectors. One, we probably should try to choose some acreage, not that it's perfect, but as a starting point. And then hopefully there's a little bit of sort of filtration of information that goes from people that receive such a notification because they own, let's just say for simplicity, 10 acres. They own 10.2 acres. And then they say to their neighbor, hey, by the way, did you receive a notification from the township? Oh, no, I didn't. And then that person might become informed and have 9.7 acres. And therefore now they're tuned in and they might participate. But so we could discuss an acreage. The other thing that we could probably do, it's a little bit messier. It'd have to be a combination to choose both an acreage and locations and highlight first of all, the riparian corridors of Saucon Creek and Black River, which is a tributary to it, and then some of these highland tracts of real estate, where again, you'd look at an acreage, and we have preserved, if you look at our list of preservation, we've preserved tracts as low as 5, 6 acres certainly, and some of those are actually on Highland real estate. So that might be one way we could try to target people for mailings. I'm just trying to think of what resources I would have at my fingertips. First of all, Carol, do we have, I know with the turnover in the township, I would always go to Chris Gargis for something like this. Do we have a GIS specialist on staff right now?
What are you trying to get, Drew?
What I'm trying to get are like a two selector two variables
Yeah, I
to
just
say
plugged it in.
within the polygons that comprise the highlands, and I don't know what, a 4 or 5 acre minimum, so that anyone with 2 acres living on one of these slopes, we're not bothering them with a tract that's just really probably too small to consider practically. So
Well,
I
if you
know
can tell
I'm
me where that map is of like the slopes, because that's not my.
the slope maps help,
Yeah,
but then
like I just plugged it into like the tax records.
right.
And looking at people that are 10 to 500 acres that are just owner occupied, because that takes out like a lot of what landfill has and whatever else. There's 145 properties, but now you can go on the map and you can zoom in and see where they fall within those areas. I just don't know what those areas are, but we can do that easily without dumping it on zoning.
Thinking about it without Chris, and my problem is I'm traveling in January for a couple of weeks. So trying to get something targeted for February, I get a little bit nervous about overcommitting. But my GIS guy could probably do this pretty easily, just provided that I give him a window of opportunity.
Well, that's what I mean. Like I just did it now while we're sitting here. You know what I mean? So, but it's just a matter of like.
Could you compare it with the map?
Yeah, that's like I don't know what those.
This is from the OSA, the Open Spaces Plan.
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, and then this can just convert to a Excel spreadsheet. Like it just does it on its own.
Right.
So
Then the only other overlay, the reason I mentioned our situation is we have the geology mapped out. So we have all these pre-Cambrian redding prone tracks already mapped out.
People that own between.
That's just 10 to 500. Just put
10
in,
to 500.
Yeah. And that's just owner occupied. I mean, that doesn't. There's people that have.
No, I know.
You can look at others. I just figured it's
I'm
freaking
just
dirty.
curious. That's not an overwhelming number. That's all.
No.
There's 11,000 residents, so that's not.
No. And I mean, if you wanted to start with larger parcels, you know what I mean? I would say throw as many lines in the water as we can. You know, if you invite 145, hope, 10 show up. If you invite only 50, maybe you get 1. So.
What was the threshold value you used?
I mean, you can plug in anything you want. I just.
What did you plug in?
10,
10,
minimum 10
okay.
acres.
Okay.
I did 10 to 500, owner occupied only, and I got 145
Okay.
parcels.
Let me talk to my colleague and see within the next day or two what his reaction is. He might say, yeah, let me have lunch and then I'll go do it.
Yeah.
So we'll do that to try to have an open space information episode. So that's one thing we could do. The other thing that I think we should do is devote time to we're charged actually with revising the open space plan. If you've read it, you realize that. And so we should do that. And maybe I thought what we could do with a little bit of time now is just off the tops of our heads come up with any criteria that we think would represent improvements that we could consider. So one thing that jumps out of this presentation, and in fact the property we just scored, was people alluded to that the property itself, that buildings being of historical significance. So in the open space plan, it discusses cultural and historical significance. But in my time on open space, we've never had that conversation, and we don't have a category. And that's why I was curious about what his selection criteria is that I think we should consider when we focus on this, modifying our score sheet to be a little more comprehensive. The other thing you notice in the open space plan, there was a large number of items, and our score sheet is a little bit more restrictive. I'm not suggesting we have 32 columns to score, but I think something such as historical and cultural significance. The other thing that jumps off at me a bit is, whereas we have identified, or they've identified, some of these highland landscapes as specific areas of significance, we don't do what, for example, the federal program does, or what New Jersey does. New Jersey, right away, they map the highlands out and say, these are environmentally significant. Our plan kind of indirectly gets there by identifying some pieces of real estate, but certainly not all of them. So those are a couple of things that just immediately came to mind to me that we might have a conversation about as scorable criteria. Are they on the highlands, and give it a number, and then likewise consider historical and cultural significance. That just means a little extra work for us when we're evaluating a property, but we're capable of doing that. There's already databases out there for us. And so, again, a similar thing in our open space plan, they talk about the proving grounds at Reddington Proving Grounds. Let's say, for example, when we scored the, I guess it's in open space, I could probably use the name, the Petrie property. It's adjacent to that, and if we were scoring the next property down, we wouldn't have a category to give that credence, even though our open space action plan literally and specifically refers to that, or Bull Run Cave, for example. So I think it would be good for us to have a meeting dedicated, or perhaps you tell me what, I'm asking for a reaction. Should we have a subcommittee work on revising the open space plan?
I think a dedicated meeting would be helpful.
Yeah, dedicated meeting for that.
And this is outdated, it's 2007. I mean, a lot of the information is still relevant, but it is 2007.
Right.
So,
First time I read it, I thought I was missing
It's not
something new.
inclusive.
not, yeah, but they're so good, it's still, a lot of
Well,
it's
one
still
of the things
pertinent.
that's missing is we have never established signage.
Right.
And it says in there that, that is added value to help.
Yes, that's a
Promote.
classic example when I refer to those blue signs that I see along the roadways, and we don't have a
Okay.
similar thing. Okay.
We should
Well,
also
I like
consider,
those. I think that's a good idea, those signs, to advertise and.
Well, it gets people thinking, like you said, you see them when you go to Bucks County.
Yeah, they know that we have a program.
Well,
so
I guess that then ties into the thought of how it improves the property value around it.
Right.
And I don't know if that's something in your scoring metric that you might want to take into consideration.
Right. That could be something for us to certainly bring up in our information center, information session. The other thing, when you think about this, of course, is when people are looking at properties next to public land that's locked up, that's often a major, well, Cheyenne could tell us a lot more about that, of the real estate value impacts of having properties next door that just can't be developed because
People are always, if there's an open field and it's like developer owned, people are like, yeah, it's okay, but it could change. When they know it's preserved, or automatically it's like a slam dunk for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know,
We
do we
should
need
also-
Laura, do you think we need a motion to have a subcommittee meeting in the future? We can simply do that, can't we?
Is it a subcommittee or just a meeting dedicated to open space?
I'm open either way. If everybody wants to part, or if we just do it as a voluntarily open session meeting.
I think so.
I don't think we
open
can.
it to everybody.
Yeah,
I don't know if we could if we'll ever have the luxury of devoting one of our meetings, because there's always business from month to month. So I think we need a special
Well, if you
meeting.
do a special meeting, like at a different date though,
Yeah,
and you're having a quorum, then you need to advertise it,
Okay,
That'd be good.
Can we do that?
so.
Yeah.
okay. And do we want to do this as a full committee,
I
or?
think it should be voluntary, because not everybody's on the open space committee, but if they want to learn, then yeah, of course, but I don't,
From a procedural aspect, I don't think there's any reason we can't just have a voluntary subcommittee that can bring recommendations to this committee that doesn't require some sort of numerical quorum or official committee. Is that true, Laura, do you know?
Right, well, just like you're doing with the open space subcommittee we have now, yeah, you can make another committee like that
Okay,
to go do, I don't know, mock-up
Yeah, mock-up.
changes to the document and.
So if
Bring
we,
it back and we
if
just
we
talk
start
about
this
it.
with like a doodle poll or a scheduling poll, as a starting point, are Tuesdays generally good for people? I mean, we're here on this Tuesday of the month. Okay. Let it be resolved that I'll try to get this going and schedule a special meeting where we can, again, probably we should reread the open space action plan again, so we're that much more familiar with it. And then come together and discuss ways of modifying this document. What are we missing? What should the focus be for 2025 going forward, rather than 2007?
So I have a question, if you don't mind, and then I have a comment. The question is, what's the Lower Saucon Township mini open space plan?
Say
Or is that
again?
doesn't exist anymore?
I read
The
that.
Lower Saucon Township mini open space plan provides statistics and surveys. What's the I couldn't find it on our website.
That
I don't even know
may
if
be an anachronism, so,
Is that a typo?
I don't think so.
no, I don't think
because
it's a
very
typo. I
specific,
think it was a
yeah.
starting point.
It's the Lower Saucon Township mini open space plan. So that's where it says, so they're referring to as a plan. Is that this document that we're reading?
I don't.
I don't think
It
so.
sounded like it was a precursor to me when that's what I
maybe it
thought,
could be.
that it was maybe what this, ultimately, this sprung forth from that plan. But I'll look into that, with
I
township.
couldn't
here.
find it.
Someone has to know. It might be in a file drawer, not even
Right.
computerized.
And my comment is kind of piggybacking. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but you put on our website, the EAC website, all these grants that are available. You know, or grants that are at least available to landowners, any landowner. You know, our EAC, you know, our committee on the township website's kind of dry.
Yeah, I think this would all be good things for us to discuss.
Yeah.
Don't look at me like
At
that.
that meeting.
I have a thing that you should discuss.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I think it would be a good idea if the open space subcommittee would discuss putting conservation easement on some of the land that the township owns outright. Because I think some of that land deserves to be conserved.
Right, that makes good sense.
That's a good thing.
It'd be a little tricky because, you know, if you have to figure out what money was it purchased with, you know, like the man that was here, that was just talking, said that there was a township where property was purchased with open space funds, but somebody was trying to, but some people later on were trying to change it.
Yeah, the current council.
Right, exactly. So, okay, let me move forward and try to find a date for us and see how many people are interested in, and we'll do that. And I think that'll be a big step in the right direction. So then, moving forward, we had the Mutular lot line change, which is kind of an interesting property. I know it generated some confusion because it's mostly Williams Township, and only a little bit was Lower Saucon's purview. I don't know if anybody Googled Earth the property and saw it. It's a place that, it's on Lower Saucon Road. It's almost transitional to Island Park Road. I'm not sure where that line is exactly. But there's a sawmill there and an old stone farmhouse with some outbuildings. And when I looked at it, it didn't seem like a major issue to me at all.
Well, I looked at it, and what they want to do is they want to do a lot line change.
Right.
And after the lot line change, a big lot will be almost entirely in Lower Saucon Township. And that's the one where there's plans to build something on, to build a house on.
Okay.
The other one is, after they get finished doing the lot line change, it'll all be in Williams Township. So that's what's going on. As far as environmental, items are, I think they moved the wetlands from the the bigger, the lot to the other lot.
I'm trying to get to there now.
Yeah, that map does not
Yeah, the
very
map doesn't
helpful.
tell, how'd you
Yeah,
get
that
all
was a
that
very busy
information?
map and hard
I
to
have my
find.
ways. I've been doing this for 20 years or something like that, remember?
Because I couldn't read that map. That map did not
Tell
help.
me.
Yeah, how big is the what?
So is that also a subdivision then? They're dividing
it
it
says-
into multiple properties?
I don't know, I think after they do the lot
lot
line
change.
change, since the proposed house is already on one of those lots, is that gonna automatically make it okay? Or do they have to come back here and get like, some more permission to actually build a house or whatever?
Well, the
There's a
building's whole
sentence in
different-
here, Alan, that says, this plan proposes no site development, specifically no impact to any tree or woodlands, no tree removal, or no building additions. That's on this one, to move the lot line.
Changes.
Your question is, after they move the lot line, right? What's gonna
I'm just
happen?
wondering, if we simply give them permission to move the lot line, they want a bunch of, what do you call it?
Variance.
Variances. So,
I think it was waivers, no?
waivers or something. And what do they need all those for unless they're gonna try
Well,
to get permission to build?
What they needed to show on their lot line plan and all that, a lot of it was.
Well, anyway, that's what's going on. It's,
Within
it's,
500 feet, they know the
the,
doesn't help.
the first lot was,
Yeah, you can-
I have something
was
like
big.
I
no
have it on my
idea.
computer, I can blow it up and it shows.
You can really zoom in far. It's you can go.
Smaller, and then the bigger lot contained the environmental land, so they moved that
Looks like a
environmental
comic
land.
book almost.
The other lot where the buildings are already existing,
Right,
so that
look at all the
land
red
where they
lines.
wanna build a
Very
house
crowded.
doesn't hardly have any environmental
Sure,
problems.
people that read these all the time.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not
the
one of them.
features on the landscape, though, the wetlands and the relatively steeper slopes is something they'll have to contend with if they're trying to get a permit to build anyway. So I don't see where the property line
It's gonna change that.
has environmental significance at this juncture. It's tricky business in the sense that if you're presupposing something someone's gonna do and you try to, in essence, make a recommendation on that basis, I don't think you're at that point yet, and I don't think you could
Yeah,
argue that they shouldn't revise the positions of the lot lines just in case they fill in the blanks.
right. Yeah, it's hard to give any recommendation on a lot line change.
It's single family dwelling. Yeah, single
I don't know if anyone wants to make a motion otherwise, but I think this is just a no comment.
Yeah,
Yeah, no action.
I second no action here.
Do we need to vote on that, Carol? Or just choose not to render advice? No comment is fine. Okay. Are we good with no comment? Okay. Right. There's not a vote, so we don't have to record that, right? And then the larger
I'll second that.
set of plans are on the table behind me, and that's an ongoing development, and a much more substantial set of land use changes that have already been approved. And I think these look to me like standard, moving through the process adjustments. So I don't know if anybody else feels differently about that and any have identified any specific concerns, but again, it seemed to me to be something that's just a natural evolution of a large site development.
Yeah, and I brought a couple pictures of Colesville where it meets. I mean, they've already got the waterways, for the stormwater management, if y'all wanted to look at it, because going through it, I know they are gonna take down trees, but they're also gonna replace equivalent.
Now they're gonna go higher now. They're gonna put more in. There was a thing
Yeah,
there
it
that-
depends, where it is. So I just wanted to show that, it's already existing,
Right.
so.
It's not something proposed.
Is this a second no comment?
I would say so.
You're saying you don't have any comments? Yeah, it just seemed like standard development adjustments.
They're doing well,
Okay, are we all comfortable with a no comment?
Yeah.
Okay. So no comment, Carol.
Yeah.
We don't have any additional developer items. Public comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Jeffrey R. Zettelmoyer. I come to you tonight to touch on a few things. In fact, some of the things you discussed this evening. I come to you because I was a former township administrator in Lower Saucon Township. I was the township manager as well as the zoning and planning director. So a lot of the things that your previous presenter, as well as what you folks have discussed here, harken back about 23 years ago, and I do have a good memory. The first thing I'd like to touch on is the roads study. I believe that's your baseline.
I'm sorry, say that again one time.
Roads study. Dr. Rhodes was brought up here from Philadelphia at my request back in 2001 to do an environmental impact for the township. Her and a consort friend of hers were driven around the whole township by me. We took a look at a lot of the types of issues you're looking at tonight, and we developed a report, and I think you still have that report.
Yes, we do, yes.
Okay. Second of all, the coordination of EACs, I think, is important. I think there's somebody in Easton that's working on doing coordinations. And I live in the city of Bethlehem, so you could tell me to sit down because I'm not a township resident. But I think I do have a history with this township, and I do have relatives who live here, so in the township. So I think that would be important for your group to look at as well.
I didn't catch your name.
Jeffrey R. Zettelmoyer. Okay.
There was some outreach with that. Whitehall came and,
Allentown.
right?
Yeah.
And there was
Allentown.
quite a few of us. We only had one meeting so far, but we agree with you on that one.
All right. And some of the things your former presenter touched on, you ought to probably have a working copy of your 319 and your 515 from your zoning officer, because that's all your farmland preservation, which includes the Pitchell Farm, right, Kathy? And I would also suggest that maybe you should talk with somebody either on staff or who's qualified to be a forester, and you might be able to reach out to the feds or the state. Right now, I would like to make you aware that we're gonna probably lose all of the beech trees in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'm sure you're aware of that. There's a worm that's getting into the root system, and it's gonna kill the 19 different species of beech trees. Also, as my role as in the city of Bethlehem, I'm on a nonprofit housing board called Housing Opportunity Movement. We have enough funds to help people of low and moderate income get into housing. But one of the things that strike us as a board is that we are looking for vacant land in the city, and there is none. Okay? I'll kind of couch that in the fact that there's a lot of vacant land that's just down the road here, but it's all owned by Lehigh, and they're never going to develop it. But nonetheless, you go to the other side of the mountain, and we may have maybe 1 or 2 half-acre lots left in the city to be developed. Everything else is either housing, and much to our chagrin, are apartments. If you go down 3rd and 4th Street, it's apartment city. So you should be aware of that, because I think under some of the state acts as well as your MS4 regulations, you're gonna have to maybe tell developers, how are you gonna control your stormwater? As the former Moore Township zoning officer in a slate area, I had to tell people, well, where are you gonna go with your water? Your impervious cover calculations are such, you're not gonna be able to let it go on your own land. So I instituted a program of having rain barrels collect all the stormwater off of the homes. And it was a palatable situation for the homeowners, because other than that, they were probably gonna have to do a 20 by 40 retention pond somewhere on their property. And some lots didn't fit that. When it comes to historic preservation, I'm also involved with the Borough of Hellertown as a consultant, so I need to disclose that to you. But when you get into looking at historic properties, you need to develop, if you have a local HARB, Historic Architectural Review Board here in the township, you need to see if it's local guidelines you need to live up with, state guidelines, or federal guidelines. You may have a property or two here that could receive federal historic preservation status, which they just did with the pump down in Upper Saucon Township.
Right.
Get its own plaque, its own recognition, but there are things that go with that, including increased insurance costs. When you were talking about the lot line adjustment, I don't think it's germane to the issue discussed, but one thing you need to maybe reach out to your attorney about is something called, in zoning parlance, the doctrine of merger. If you have two lots that are grandfathered, they can be joined without a lot line adjustment. They become one lot then. That's the doctrine of merger. So that's something you should be aware of when you're looking at some of your plans where, you know, you may need to reach out to Williams and see, I don't think it is, but you need to reach out to Williams Township and say, hey, is this a non-conforming property? Because ours is probably non-conforming, and they join without even a lot line adjustment. The county also has a GIS system. So the process you were talking about earlier, you may want to talk to the county about, because they can get specific as to one thing or two or three elements that you want to see in your GIS. They'll send it to you. You can download their app or contact them and they'll send it to you. And I think that kind of concludes my comments for this evening. Thank you for putting up with me for the last 4 minutes, but I appreciate the opportunity to address you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for coming.
You sowed good seeds for us.
Okay, and just so I can prove my recollection, Kathy's brother's house was the last permit I wrote for the township.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One other thing I forgot to mention. On the downside slope, it better go up. On the downside slope of, and I know it's contentious in this township, the downside slope of your landfill, there are two very, very important pieces of plant life that are only found in the eastern part of the United States. I'm not going to identify them, but I'm going to give you the location, because I was sworn to secrecy by Ann Rhodes when we did the study. She says, Jeff, I'll come back out of my grave if you tell anybody where they are and what they are, but at least I can give you the location. And that may be something to fight the ongoing battle with what's being developed over there as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because that should be told to the state and the federal government.
We need that.
That's in the inventory, the natural inventory, isn't it?
It is, but it may not be referenced.
It's hinted at, I think.
Right, because
Yeah.
I remember reading
Yes, I
it.
remember reading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did read a study for once.
If you have some notes, if you feel like it's something, just email me. I'm trying to take notes on what you said, but if you have something typed up.
I'll print it up for you.
Thank you.
We can always
Thank you.
use input, it always
need-
helps.
Okay, and I will take some of the presentation tonight back to the EAC.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, updates and reports. I think most of these should be reasonably easy. Let's begin then. Okay, so the approval of the We Can Serve PA membership fee. Jennifer, has that been resolved?
I think it's come to the committee to vote.
Okay.
We want to join at the cost of $295, which is the We Can Serve.
And it's for everybody?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And just in our previous conversations, this seems like something that several of us have thought very highly of and something we should pursue. And they have a yearly conference, which I actually presented at last year here at the old steel site. And they move around though. So they were here in Lehigh Valley this last April. But that would allow us to participate in that meeting, I believe.
Yeah, I believe the next one, is in State College.
Yeah.
So, it's got great topics, but man, that's a hike.
So you have a motion, Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a motion. Does anyone want a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of joining the We Can Serve PA membership?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Any
did you get a count, Carol?
It's all of us.
Okay. And Laura just said yes too.
Said it twice.
The meeting policies I kind of already covered. I just wanted to remind us that, you know, when we're making a motion, we need a motion, we need a second. I'm sometimes too quick to go to the vote without the second, so keep me honest there. And again, by raising our hands, it just makes it easy for Carol to keep the record accurate. The minute procedure, that's another thing. So you recall the problem was, since we have become a more active committee, our meetings are longer, they're more substantive, and therefore the minutes are longer. And given that the transcription software sometimes has difficulty correctly articulating what we had said, we moved to a process where we had agreed that I could submit my corrections and we would approve them de facto. But the problem with that is we're really not, we're trusting my corrections without really looking at them to approve them. And Robert's rules requires that we do look at the changes. So what I proposed via that recent email, and I submitted my corrections, is that what we'll have to do, Carol did a very good job of getting the transcript to me soon, and then I made my corrections and shared that. Chad made a good suggestion that we just make that a shared document, and then that makes it easier for everyone to look at that document and add any additional changes themselves. But what was happening was, for a few meetings anyway, I submitted my comments to Carol, Alan submitted his comments, but none of you know what those comments actually were. So we're gonna have to use this shared document and, or sit here and go through the corrections at every meeting. So I don't think anybody really wants to do that. So we're gonna have to adopt that process, and if you don't, I mean, the way we're gonna have to do this is just gonna have to be cut and dried. If you have corrections and you don't make them to that document, then you'll have to make them at this meeting, and then they had better be short. They had better be 1 or 2 words. The other element that's quite important is we can't change the record of what's said here. So if I say something and I don't describe it properly and it's just wrong, that has to stay in the record. I could perhaps add an addendum to point out what I meant to say, but anything that's on the record has to stay on the record. Basically what we're trying to do is correct misspellings. The most recent one, the software took, I said, we would have to go out and score it, and it read that as, we'll have to go out and squirt. So you can't leave that in the minutes, but that's just a correction. That's not something entirely different. So just, that's basically what I wanted to cover by way of our minutes procedure. And this way we can have accurate minutes, which I think we all want, but efficient, okay?
Is that something that is within the capabilities of the township to provide a Google Doc that's shareable and editable by everyone, or a PDF at least?
Well, I usually do.
Yeah, but somewhere that's on a shared.
No, I can do that and share it as a Google document for everybody, and then everybody can weigh in. It might be a good idea to, and it's what we should adopt. Check in on that document at the bottom. Either say, I read the minutes, I'm fine, or I've put my corrections in. And that's something we do on an important committee. I've been on it at work, and it's very helpful because that particular scenario has very real legal ramifications. And so when we approve minutes, they have to be acceptable to everybody, or this is a committee that's related to, does personnel stuff. So we should do a similar thing and just simply say, I read the minutes, they're fine, Laura. I read the minutes, they're fine, Cheyenne. Or my changes are above, okay?
Can we, like, if I'm checking out my minutes, can I be doing it at the same time that Jennifer's checking out hers and you're checking?
Yeah, they're live documents. If someone else is changing things, it shows up right while it's happening. So we'll put it as a Google
And I
Doc.
assume that we'll only change our own, what we said.
Yeah, or if you, I mean, as always, if we catch something that you just notice is mostly it's typo issues. It's the software mishearing, misreading, mistranscribing, or there's a missing word or something like that. But sometimes they are substantial, and of course you could understand why. When I gave the hydrology presentation, it was a complete mess because these geological jargon is almost another language, and so you could program these things to start adopting words through time, just like you could with Word, and the dictionary in that document or in that software.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can make changes. You can make changes to my changes and say, no, I don't remember it that way. And then we have taken upon ourselves though to read them so that, like we're about to do in a little while, we can approve or not approve the minutes as amended. Are we good? Okay, so that brings us, you're good. All right, thank you, Chad. Climate action plan, is there any update, Alan?
Oh. Okay, let me see what I wrote here.
That was an O, not a no?
No, wait a minute, I have something I want to say. Okay. Item number 1, no new information on the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission climate change activity. Item number 2, just to show how important it is to discover and document methane gas emissions from landfills. Several companies are developing high-tech methods to do that. An article was written in Mechanical Engineering magazine about these companies' activities. If you would like to read the article, I will email you a copy of it. So send me an email. Item number 3, a very informative discussion on the state of worldwide negotiations sponsored by the United Nations to regulate the plastics part of petrochemical pollution is contained in a podcast episode 154 on thegreatsimplification.com. That's what I have to say.
Okay. Thank you.
you.
So I'll email you for a copy of that landfill gas.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, me too. Well, send me an email and
Yep.
Yeah.
Laura Ray, is there any update on plastic bags?
Yeah, just a real small update because I've been behind. So I did get a list of businesses from both the Chamber of Commerce and also the township gave me a list of businesses. Both of them were very old and it was a walk down memory lane. So when I went through it, actually they had all of Hellertown and Lower Saucon combined. So I manually went through and put all the Hellertown ones out of it. Tried to keep only the Lower Saucon ones, but a lot of them are, I can tell just by going by the shopping center, it's like, oh, I don't have that. So I'm not sure how we can divide it up. It's maybe by address that we have, if we want to divide it up between a few of us on the subcommittee, because I know we wanted to put together like a little survey question and go out and talk to some of the businesses, so.
Did you guys talk to Fresh Market? They started giving bags out again. Did you talk to them?
I attempted to, but they didn't know. They said that they weren't sure why they switched back.
You mean
It's
they switched
corporate.
back? Yes, I know. I was there last week or the week before, and
Yeah.
I noticed that. And
I
they
asked.
said that I just talked to the cashier, and they
Same here.
didn't know what the explanation was. Just sort of said, "Well," I said, "Did you get a lot of personal complaints?" And she said, "No." She said, "So I don't know why, but here we are." So
I just think it'd be good to know, what the reasoning is.
yeah.
So that's my only update.
Kathy, you're next with our list of EAC accomplishments.
Thank you.
I didn't bring it with me. I apologize. I can send it to everybody via email. So there were questions from Lower Saucon Township Council of, you know, the costs and the budget of the EAC. And why did, the numbers go up in the budget? So, I thought it would be, prudent and also, hopefully show the purpose of the EAC. So I did a review of 2024, and what we accomplished. Everything, you know, I kind of took our minutes and then what from the minutes we actually got done in 2024. I would be happy to send everybody the information if they want it. What I did not do is ask Carol or Kathy the cost. Like I did the tire recycling, so I know what that cost, but I don't know what the electronics cost. And then there was a couple other little things in there, but we actually got a lot accomplished. And I think it proves why you need an EAC in a township, but also confirms how we spent the money and why we needed money in our budget. That's all.
Might I suggest that you share that and that it get read into the minutes in essence at the next meeting? Sure. That would make good sense. That's January, so the year is over and our work is done. And so I do think it's good to establish that record. And maybe if there's just those few big cost items, you might ask Carol to follow up. And if easy, I think you probably have a lot of that already.
I think Jennifer got the numbers
Yeah,
when we presented
yeah, so if we can just get those numbers in there, I think it's very worthwhile making that in essence part of our record, because if you share it with us, then we know what we did, but I think it's important for the township to be aware of what we accomplished.
So Jennifer just pulled it up for me. So would you like me to read it
Sure.
off? Okay.
You could choose to hit the big items.
That's fine. So identify goals and projects for the EAC in 2024. Reevaluate the open space committee, which was done. Reevaluate the bylaws and rewrite the bylaws of subcommittee, which was done. Invite the EPA to discuss what environmental justice is, done on 6/11/24 by Imani Reed. Invite Drew to talk about recharging the waterbeds, done on July 9th. Host a tire deposit day, invite other townships, done, 93 tires brought in. We started the recycling for, oh, I know what that is. I'm gonna skip that. Keep PA beautiful. We had pickup in April and November. EAC collaboration started Lehigh Valley EAC. Meeting started Lauren House from Allentown EAC, 7/9/24. EAC Network Virtual Conference on 2/24/24 was done. We also accomplished the Springtown Source Water Protection that was presented on May 14th. We attended the Cooks Creek 50th Year Water Festival and connected with other EACs. Durham wants to work with Lower Saucon on July 13th. We discussed drafting a letter of support to the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission for grant submissions, which was done. We conserved PA EAC Fall Gathering, Saturday, October 5th, was attended. We have a member that regularly attends the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission Climate Action Plan. We promoted Penn State private water supply education and water testing. Reviewed, scored, and submitted 4 open space conservation easement properties. Started the process on plastic bag ban. We had a volunteer sign up sheet for Clean Earth Recycling on September 28th. That was the electronics. And we reviewed several planning zoning board proposals from an EAC perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you put into.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Pulling that together. Okay.
Can I ask 2 questions? Comment question, please. Please, the grant for the electronics recycling, is there a status update on that?
Yeah, we said it last month. We got
Did we get it or no?
the grant.
There wasn't a money coming back?
Yeah, from Northampton, 2,000.
Did that come back?
Yes.
Okay.
And
I
we mentioned that. That should be in our minutes because that was announced last.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
good.
the Penn State extension thing, I had replied, I'm not sure if everybody was on that email change, I got some bounce backs. But I did apply and set up an account there, I shared how to access that information. And then if there's anything relevant, if there's any way that we can get it out onto the EAC's website, the page, whether we can.
The Penn State well water.
There's a well water, there's a water testing webinar that might be beneficial for the community, especially like for myself, to get my water tested. I'm curious about that. So I just don't know how much oversight we have to recommend for new items to put on the sidebar.
I think what he's saying though is, can we put it on our website? On the EAC
website.
You're talking about promoting it.
We're getting a new website, so some of the stuff that, I'll talk to Kathleen and see if we can do that.
Well, the question is where we can publish information or events.
Can the township make a Facebook post about it?
That's
She
beyond
did.
just.
She did.
Yeah,
She
but
did.
beyond just Facebook,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, just as a place where it's permanently listed and not something you gotta scroll back through the feed to find. So,
You know, that's a good idea too. There's some good points in there, like just, you know, like tips, you know, or information from the webinar. You could put on the website.
potentially, yeah.
Well,
Or
if we're
any of
talking
these
about the
other resources that we're talking about, if we're having an information session on open space, to have that on there as well. I don't know.
Yeah,
I agree.
So-
That's a good idea.
okay. So that brings us to reviewing and approval of the November 12th minutes. I hope everybody looked through the corrections. Are there any additional corrections? Okay, so are we ready to approve the minutes? All in favor? Accept as done? Aye.
Second.
Okay.
Yeah, need a second.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Woo-hoo! Need a second. No.
You need a second.
You do.
I think I know this, but all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks everyone for a great year. This is,
I'll take it.
One day.
I like being able to, that's the only thing I'm ever gonna second, is the adjournment. That's it.
So, when they move this over, you're saying it's all gonna be in Lower Saucon, or is that line Williams Township? Where am I?
This is the Williams Township, Lower Saucon.
I'm sorry, I missed you guys.
Right.
We were sick.
Right
I don't know
now,
if I was sick or if it was like
bigger
allergies. I
lot.
just had no voice and like a cough. Like I woke up and I was like,
Williams.
Bigger lot
waking
is
up.
basically